Is that all, or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, sure. Yeah, this regarding this thing about stability and accelerationism, I actually think we can sum up the controversy in a more simple word: voluntarism. I actually don't think the question of whether things are accelerating or not, or whether things are destabilizing, is because we voluntarily wish them to. In my view, we recognize that the liberal order is objectively breaking down and is objectively becoming delegitimized in the eyes of the masses, in the eyes of the American people. Now, I've observed among many liberals what I think is some kind of psychosis. They want to blame Russia and they want to blame foreign interference and they want some kind of scapegoat. But I think this is just a kind of denial of the fact that liberalism is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. So to me, I wouldn't say I'm an accelerationist because that assumes that I have to initiate this transformation. I think rather, as proven by the very election of Trump, which is very well outside of my own hands and outside of the hands of people who think like me, we merely no longer, we merely refuse to partake in this kind of liberal psychosis, which is in denial of the trend of reality. We want to embrace this new reality and be worthy of it, own up to it, and seize hegemony over it. So you're right that there is no guarantee that the collapse of the establishment will lead to the success of the progressive forces. Actually, what we would, I mean, that's a loaded term to clarify. I consider us populistic, communistic, whatever type of people to be the progressive forces. But oftentimes it can lead to an even more violent reaction on behalf of the establishment to save itself. That was the example of fascism, for example, in Germany. A lot of people think this was the establishment collapsed there. It didn't collapse. Hitler was appointed by the German establishment and backed by the German establishment. I don't want to get into a history thing, but whether this leads to I kind of also disagree that it doesn't lead to a benefit of the people per se. I guess I would have to ask you what examples you have in mind, because for me, an example of some type of threat to the American establishment was that there actually is a history of populism in America. There was the Populist Party and the Farmers Alliance in the early 20th century and the late 19th century. And these actually culminated into what we now know as the New Deal Democrats. Of course, this wasn't a full-on collapse of the establishment, but FDR did shake up the American establishment. And then
Well, let me clear something up really quick. When I say populist, in this sense, I'm sort of leaning into the definition of illiberal too. And by liberal, I mean, a society that plays by these, I guess, norms of governing. That stability and building off of that stability is what I'm saying is necessary. Like you're talking about us at the most a social democrat building up a big welfare state, which is characteristic of like a social democrat liberal. That wasn't an actual like revolution or anything.
I actually would disagree. Yeah, I would disagree with that characterization. I think that it wasn't a social democrat just implementing gradual ideas. It was in the context of a rising populist momentum in America under the backdrop of the Russian Revolution as well, a rising labor movement, an acceleration of the class struggle, and the imminent threat of some kind of actual political revolution being taken seriously by the governments of the West across the board, including America.
But that's the thing. That's the thing, though. Like, I think we should keep this main structure in place and also allow these populist movements to gain steam, so that the top, the reaction of the ruling class, their reaction is always to say, we need to prevent some type of revolution. We need to prevent an uprising. What I'm saying is, for example, this election, Biden versus Trump. I was very strongly for voting for Biden because I do see populism on the rise. And I think that populism is going to force the people who are in power to create actual change. Because I don't want illiberals to be in charge, people who don't believe in any governing whatsoever, because that leads to a complete societal collapse. So I'm not saying that these aren't populist movements. What I am saying is we need this structure that can be moved by these populist movements, because I don't think if we want things like universal healthcare, universal childcare, universal education, that isn't possible without a full government working together.
Well, I consider this stance, in my view, it falls victim to a certain paradox, which is it. And I don't want to, throw curveballs and confuse. So I'm going to try to clarify everything I'm going to say. It confuses what it takes to be the objective reality we merely have to recognize and accept, and the subjective one. What do I mean by that? If it was within our power, even if we determined that it was necessary to preserve the establishment of some kind, I don't want to strawman you, like based what you were saying, we need to keep the stability. If we even had that power, that also assumes we have the power to create the alternative. If we had that power, why wasn't Bernie the candidate? And the reason Bernie wasn't the candidate is because we don't even have that